G'day everyone, this is a couple of Mad Bean spark plugs I've been working on, and as I was putting them together I thought of a couple of beginner troubleshooting tips that might help you when you're actually boxing up the effect. When you get to the point of boxing up your effect, if you're boxing up a particularly tight build, you can often have problems with things shorting out inside the case. So as always, you want to test the board before you put it inside the case to make sure it's working properly. If your effect isn't working properly when you put it inside the case and you go to the trouble of wiring it all up and you find that there's a problem with it, it is much harder to work out the problem than if you just test the board before you start actually putting it together. But at this stage you will have an assumed working effect, and if you find that you've wired it all up and you put the back plate on, you plug it into your amp and it's doing strange things, it can often be that the back plate is touching something on the PCB or some of the hardware, and it's actually it's grounding part of the signal perhaps. One place I would look at is the 3-pole double throw. Often if you put the 3-pole double throw switch in and you try and get rid of all the thread on the front to make it look all nice and neat, it looks great, but often you'll find that the back of the plate will actually touch the 3-pole double throw, and you'll have some of these connecting to touching the back of the plate. And as I've said in other videos, the enclosure and the plate is all grounded, so you want to make sure that none of this stuff is touching the plate or the enclosure. Another thing to look at too is the input and output jacks. These lugs that stick up, and also the little connector thing down here on both sides, can touch the enclosure if you've drilled your holes too far down or too far up. So just make sure, just sight around, make sure that these things aren't touching the outside of the enclosure. And another area, another common area that you can have things shorting out is the actual PCB. You'll notice that I've got some red tape on top of this, on top of the MOSFETs, because as part of the spark plug they use 2 MOSFETs, and the MOSFETs have a little heatsink that comes up, and I believe that that's connected to the gate or the drain. So it's actually part of the circuit, this little metal bit here. And if that metal bit's touching the back plate, you're going to be sending part of the signal in the effect PCB to ground, which is the back plate. So just make sure that none of this stuff is touching. If it's plastic like that, it won't matter. If it's, obviously if it's insulated, it won't matter so much. But if it's bare metal like this that I just pointed out before, or perhaps the top of a resistor, if you've curled a resistor over, you've mounted it vertically, and the top of the resistor is touching the back plate, you're going to have problems. So basically, if you get to the point that you know the PCB is working and you've boxed it up, check those areas to make sure that none of that stuff is shorting out, and also take into account that there is a lip on this back plate too. So when you put that on, even though it might look like it's clear, if you put the back plate on, just take into account that you've got this sort of 1 or 2 mil lip that will run around the outside of the enclosure. So yeah, just make sure none of this stuff is actually touching it. Yeah, the usual effect of something inside the enclosure touching the enclosure or the lid is that you'll get no effect when you turn the effect on, or when it's in bypass. You'll just get nothing out of it. It'll just be a dead. The pedal will just be acting dead. So it's just some beginner fault finding tips, but it's something that comes up every now and then, particularly when you do a tight build. You press for room, and sometimes you can accidentally have something touching the enclosure. You just got to correct it, and it's usually an easy fix. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.